and welcome to the Organic Gardening Podcast. I'm Sarah Brown and I'm joined by my friend at Garden Organic, Chris Collins. Every month we bring you gardening tips and practical advice the organic way. So, what have we got this month? Well, we've got Chris getting enthusiastic about pea shoots.
What's amazing about pea shoots is you can multi-crop them. So once they're up about 20 centimetres, you can prune them off with the scissors, put them in your sarnie or in your salad, and they reshoot 3 or 4 times before they expire.
And our special guest, tree expert Tony Kirkham.
And you know what? Everyone thinks it can plant a tree. Everyone thinks it can prune. But actually, there's an art and a science to it.
And of course, we end with a dip in the monthly post bag, when we discuss what's safe to put on the compost heap, how to stop your soil getting waterlogged, and a mystery pest in a listener's orange tree. But first, here's a quick word about our brilliant sponsors, the Organic Catalogue. If you're stuck for Christmas present ideas, then have a browse. You may find something to treat a gardening companion, or even spoil yourself. So go online at organiccatalogue.com. And if you're a member of Garden Organic, you'll get 10% off. So just search for organiccatalogue.com. So now I'm off to the virtual potting shed to join Chris. As before, we've had to record remotely, so please forgive our funny blips and the odd stutter. It just isn't the same, is it, as sitting together with a cuppa. Hey Chris, it's really nice to speak again. How are you?
I'm good, Sarah. How are you?
I'm very well, and actually I think we have reason to celebrate because we've been shortlisted again as the Gardening Podcast of the Year. That's not bad, is it?
Oh, I think that's superb. I'm chuffed. I'm really chuffed for us all. I'm chuffed for you. I'm chuffed for Garden Organic.
Yeah, and all our lovely listeners.
Yes.
And on top of that, I did note that you've been listed as one of the top 50 influencers in the horticultural world. I am so impressed, Chris.
Yeah, no, well, if lucky it's a podcast, so you'd see me blushing. No, it's nice. You know, I've been in the trade a long time, so it's always nice to get a bit of acknowledgement, isn't it?
It is, and it's a privilege to work with you, I have to say. But
And
before we get too much backslapping, and let's get down to work.
Let's get our heads out the door after this.
Okay, so what am I doing in the garden this month? Well, the instinct is to tidy up, isn't it? Because everything is a little bit dead and dying. But I think I have to fight that instinct. To be honest, I think it's a mistake to be too tidy in the garden because there's so many habitats and shelters there for the wildlife to hibernate in over winter.
Yeah, it's so right. You've got to remember that it's, you know, the garden is a room, but it's a living room. It's a real live room with lots of stuff going on in it. So don't treat it as your indoor living room and try and hoover it. I think that, you know, some of the things I like to do, or certainly in my allotment, I like to put habitat piles in. So I'll maybe prune out any dead wood on the fruit trees or whatever, keep that wood, retain it, and as long as it's healthy, and put it in a pile so you can get your beetles and your spiders and stuff in. Things like herbaceous plants as well, it's so tempting to cut them back, but they're that lovely brown straw coloured, aren't they? And if you're lucky enough to get a decent frost, that is a perfect sight on a winter's day, frosted herbaceous. And that also means that dead material, that dead foliage, is protecting the root ball of your herbaceous plants from any damage.
But also think how the insects love those hollow stems that they can crawl into, ladybirds and such like, and piles of leaves for hedgehogs if you're lucky enough to have a hedgehog in your garden. I've noticed that in the corner of my potting shed there's a massive amount of spider webs and spider nests rather than webs, and that's good. That, you know, there's little eggs in there, there's baby spiders will hatch out in the spring, and they'll be dealing with an awful lot of pests in the shed and in the greenhouse. So yeah, I think you're quite right. You share your plot. The organic gardener shares their plot with the wildlife. So make it good for them in the winter. Help them to survive these cold, wet winter months.
Yeah, take care of your friends. That's a good way to look at it, you know, because they will be helping you out in that garden space when the growing season kicks off again.
But if you really are keen to get out and really are keen to be doing things, there's 2 jobs I'd recommend, 2 tidying jobs. One, I think it's a good idea to clean out your greenhouse and the pots in it. Wash down the glass, that'll let in the most amount of the winter light to whatever might still be in the greenhouse growing, and brush out your pots, wash them even. That'll prevent diseases and pests like red spider mite overwintering. It'll also make sure that you check under those pots for any snails that might be lurking there. And then one other job I'll be doing is I'll be weeding and clearing the soil around my fruit trees and bushes, because that allows the birds to come down and peck at the overwintering pests. And you'll also be removing any competition for that fruit bush, competition for their roots from the grass. So those are good jobs they're kind of domestic and satisfying, but also will get you out and about.
Yes, certainly. I mean, personally, I like, how much I like winter and its own vibe, isn't it? Those fresh winter days, and I like to potter around. The good thing about winter is you're not rushing, really, are you? You've got time on your hands, and that sort of housekeeping you've described, I really enjoy doing. My polytunnel gets good clean. I like to look at my tool, wash and oil all my tools. I'm very, very fussy about making sure my tool equipment lasts. My spades and my forks and things like that. That's my little polytunnel. I'll give that a good old clean, make sure that's all in order, and it's just a nice time, fresh winter's morning, you can't beat it.
I think it's quite a reflective time this month as well, Chris. I pulled up my beans, my runner beans, and initially I was sad. I thought, oh, another growing year has ended. And then I began to get more philosophical and reflective about it. And I remembered back in May when I planted them, and then the late frost that nearly killed them, and then all that lockdown period. And I began to think, it's all a cycle of life, and it's not going to be that long before I'm sowing those beans again. And who knows what next year will bring. But there is that sense of past, but also a very, very strong sense of future, which growing helps Certainly. You to hang on to.
I think that's maybe emphasised more this year as we've been in not being able to move around so much, and we've been at home a lot more. I think that's kind of taken on, it's maybe emphasised it a little bit. Every season stands out in some way, and you learn a little bit more, you get a little bit wiser.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, we are going into winter, and though it may still feel autumnal down in the south, I'm very conscious of our listeners who are further north, and I bet by now there's some pretty heavy frosts going on.
Yes, definitely. Well, I've got a friend who I've got a lot of Scottish friends, obviously, because I used to live and work up there and study up there, and I've got a friend in Melrose, and they're putting up with quite heavy frosts and have been for a few weeks now. So you need to think about what plants you've got and how to protect them, don't you, Sarah?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think wherever you are in the country, you need to watch that weather forecast like a hawk, because frost can creep up on you unawares. I think there are certain things you can certainly do to prevent the worst of the frost damage. Just before we do that, let's talk about frost a bit. Why does frost kill a plant? Well, what happens is every plant has got water inside it, inside the cells, and this is carried up through the plant cells. Now, what happens is that water freezes when the temperature drops. That will break the cell walls, which means they can no longer carry the plant's nutrient juices, the sap, the water, or whatever. And that means the plant's going to die. So not only does a frost kill the plant, but quite often a prolonged frost will also freeze the ground so that the plant can't take up water. The ground is too hard and too icebound. So those are the dangers. So what you've got to do is protect the ground sometimes, and certainly protect the plants. Now, you can do something as simple as put a cardboard box or a pot over a particularly precious plant. Chris, you've got other tips as well, haven't you?
Yeah, you can. If you're a lover of tree ferns or any of these big in recent years, haven't we become a bit more exotic in our approach to gardening, obviously influenced by the fact that climate's changing slightly, but they will still be vulnerable. So maybe wrap up some hessian around it, make sure you protect any trunks or any crowns. That's quite important. And what you described there about how frost works, you get a thing called physiological drought, basically. That's what it is, where the ground freezes and the plant can't take up the water, and that isn't apparent usually until the spring comes. So say if you've got a big rhododendron that you love, and it looks fine all through the winter, it's frosted on the ground, and it looks fine, because what's happened is as soon as the spring comes and it comes out of dormancy, it tries to operate and start photosynthesizing, and then you get the damage. The whole plant starts to flag. So if you are in a really cold place, like up north in Scotland or whatever, it breaks the rules a little bit, but it may pay to put down a nice thick mulch. That could be an artificial one, maybe a Mypex or something, or hessian, or it could be an organic mulch. But just protect those surface roots from that permafrost.
I think that's a really good tip. And I've used leaves and straw, in fact, to protect, for instance, dahlias. I no longer dig up my dahlias because I don't get that bad a frost anymore. And I've been able to protect them by putting this mulch of dried leaves and bracken over the top of them. But one word of warning, I have to say, sometimes with some plants, it's the damp, not the frost, that kills them. And I'm thinking particularly of those Mediterranean herbs.
Yeah, I think that for us down south, it's going to be moisture's more likely to kill our plants over the winter. Plants not draining. Of course, the way to get your soil draining properly and to keep it healthy is to keep applying that compost in the spring. Make sure it's getting into that and working that soil and making sure things drain properly. Most plants don't like wet feet. They like to be in free draining soil, so always bear that in mind.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned put down compost in the spring. Don't put it down now. There's absolutely no point putting it down in the tail end of the year. We talked about leaf mould in last month's podcast, and it's worth catching up on that, how to make leaf mould, because we're now surrounded by the fallen leaves. And that's the sort of mulch which will work perfectly on your soil through the winter. It's low nutrition, but it just protects the soil against those extremes of rain and frost.
And as it breaks down, it'll help with that soil structure, that all-important soil structure as well. And let's face it, there's no short supply of leaves falling off the trees at the moment. I'm looking out my window at the yellow of the autumn, and as it just comes to its tail end, there are leaves everywhere. Remember, it's a free lunch. That's what leaf mould is. It's a free lunch.
That's so true. And last thing, Chris, I'm going to mention, because if you're back in lockdown, and I know some parts of the country are, and also you're missing getting out because the weather's so dire, why not try sowing indoors? I've been using old margarine tubs, yogurt pots, or mushroom trays. You know when you buy the mushrooms from the greengrocers? And I use them as pots. Make sure they've got holes in the bottom so you've got drainage. Get some peat-free seed sowing compost, or if you want to, use your own soil or your own homemade sowing compost. And try sowing maybe some lettuces, some winter salad leaves like mustard and cress. I've got winter purslane, for instance, absolutely delicious. They'll germinate and grow really quite quickly indoors, and they will keep you in your nice green vitamin C throughout the winter months.
They're perfect. Like straight off on your windowsill into your sandwich. I'm big on pea shoots. It was actually Garden Organic that turned me on to this. And go to the supermarket, for 80 pence you'll get a box of dried peas, one of the best 80 peas you'll ever spend in your life. Literally just get an old mushroom pallet, some decent peat-free compost, a bit of drainage. And what's amazing about pea shoots is you can multi-crop them. So once they're up about 20 centimetres, you can prune them off with the scissors, put them in your sarnie or in your salad, and they reshoot 3 or 4 times before they expire. And really, I mean, if you go to the supermarket, you can buy pea shoots. They're £1.50 for a vacuum packed bag. Listen, 80p, keep you in pea shoots all winter, no problem.
Fantastic. I'll tell you a little thing that I've been doing, Chris. I've been troubled by moles. And you see that line of molehills going across. Yeah. Luckily, it's not my lawn, but it's in the field next door. But that is very, very nice soil.
Oh, it's perfect, isn't it?
I scoop it up and I keep a bag of it ready for seed sowing and whatever. But I'll tell you a tip that I have learnt, and it sounds bonkers, but trust me, it works. I bake that soil. I put it in an oven tray, and I bake it for about 20 minutes at quite a high temperature. That is actually sterilizing the soil, because what I found before, if I didn't do that, was that I got a lot of grass and weed seeds coming up, germinating at the same time as my salad seeds. So by doing a sort of bit of domestic sterilizing, I now have a soil, a loam, which is absolutely fine to sow into. And the only things that are going to germinate are the seeds that I want to germinate, that I've sown.
That's a great tip, Sarah. I like that a lot.
Okay, well, I hope you have a great month, Chris, on your allotment and on your balcony. Yep. And we'll speak again soon.
Okay, cheers, Sarah.
So now let's turn to our special guest this month. Tony Kirkham is head of arboriculture at Kew Gardens. He is, quite simply, one of the world's great experts on trees. Sit back and enjoy as he and Chris discuss how to plant trees, what's wrong with tree planting targets, and why somewhere like Kew is so important.
Right, it's a big treat for me today. I'm back on my old stomping ground, I suppose, up at the Royal Botanical Gardens, Kew, one of my favourite. if not favourite gardens, and I'm here with my old gaffer, Mr. Tony Kirkham.
Yeah,
how you doing,
Chris?
Tony?
I'm really good, Chris. It's always good to see you.
Yeah.
Always good to catch up, and absolute pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You're looking very well, I must say.
Likewise.
So it's quite a strange time for you then, isn't it, really? Because you've had to deal with COVID.
It's probably one of the most strangest years I've ever worked in. 42 years. Last week I started at Kew. 42 years ago.
Wow.
And of all those 42 years, this has been the most bizarre, with COVID, with lockdown, with the weather. I think it's probably one of the most challenging times for any gardener, any horticulturalist growing plants, and then, as you say, coupled with COVID lockdown.
With the pandemic as well.
The pandemic, it's just been really, really weird. And but you know, Chris, I don't have to tell you, we are very flexible people in what we do and resourceful, and we always get through. And every year is different, and every year is a challenge, and everything we do is a challenge. Especially in the 21st century, so we will get through. Yeah,
you're very adaptable. Kind of brings me to my next question. Sarah Brown, who was the brains behind this podcast, gave me a stat. She says you're in charge of 14,000 trees. So
that's right. Yeah.
So that's a lot of trees.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, obviously those will stem back quite a long way, planted over a lot of time. But you'd have been personally involved in quite a lot of them.
When people ask me, what is an arboretum? You know, what is Kew? Why have all these trees? And I basically compare it to a living reference library. So you can come and look, you can come and research, you can get information, but you can't take it away with you. So you've got to come to Kew to do that research, like you'd go to a reference library.
Yes, so it is. I always refer to botanic gardens as living libraries with plants. Yeah. And also you've mentioned the 42 years. Of course, that's a vast experience, isn't it? So you kind of learn to read things and know what's going on, and you can look at the plants and tell what's happening.
Absolutely, and in that 42 years, you know, we talk about climate change, and people say to me, "Is it really happening?" You know, but over a long period. Well, I don't think 42 years is a long period in growing trees, because they've been around for millennia. But in that 42 years, I've seen an incredible change in weather patterns, which has made us change our horticultural practices, and you know, it gets more and more challenging for trees.
That's a really interesting point. So it's the seasons you've seen change, do you think?
It has, and I call it seasonal change rather than climate change.
Right.
I think we used to get, you know, when we were nippers, we used to get 4 distinct seasons. Autumn started and then ran, and we had autumn colour, horse chestnut fruits for conkers, etc. And then autumn finished to a day, winter started, hard frosts, snow, and that would have been in like November, the end of November.
Yeah.
You know, now that doesn't really start until end of December, January.
If at all, really, in London.
We're just not getting that.
Yeah.
And then winter, so autumn and winter merge into one, and then spring starts, and you think it started and it hasn't, then it has, then it hasn't, and before you know it, you're in summer. And so I reckon we're into 2 seasons now rather than 4, which is very challenging for gardeners, for horticulturalists, and it confuses everything. So the other day I was out in the Arboretum, and there's a Cornus Cusa chinensis flowering. It normally flowers in May, full flower.
Wow.
Not a second flush, it's in full flower. It must be so mixed up and confused.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the official first day of autumn, I was in shorts on my lot. It just felt like it was like 26 degrees, and I wasn't complaining, but it's obviously not good, is it?
No, it's not.
What is your sort of typical day? I suppose is quite a good question.
And the beauty of my job is that there isn't a typical. There's never 2 days alike. But you're right. I've got 14,000 trees. That's just a part of my job. Of that, about 2,500 different species from all around the world. I spent 25 years of my career at Kew plant collecting, so going out to Japan, China, Taiwan, Russia, North America, Chile, looking for plants to bring back and plant at Kew. And the initial catalyst of that was the storm in 1987, which we've all forgotten about. You know,
yeah, it seems like a long time ago.
33 years ago, you know. And so rebuilding that a big part of my job was rebuilding the Arboretum. But you know, I have about 60 staff, students, apprentices. I have 1.3 million pounds worth of machinery, horticultural machinery and equipment that I'm responsible for. Green waste recycling in the yard, so you know, making compost, supplying compost, cutting grass, you know, a massive
You've
job.
kind of got the basic, the amenity horticulture, making sure things look good for the visitors.
Absolutely, yeah.
The plants take care of. But on top of that, you've got your travelling. So what if you go travelling? Is it or seed collecting? Is that mainly what you're doing?
Mainly seed collecting. So we know what we want, and we work very closely with host countries, and we mount expeditions, and we have a list of what we'd like to collect.
So you're working with governments and NGOs in these places.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. And that's the only way, and networking and sharing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the main. That was about gardeners, isn't it? That we have an amazing ability to share information, and that's obviously very important. And I suppose you need a massive, really quite deep plant knowledge, tree knowledge to be able to do that, don't you?
You need to know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
You need to be able to identify it when you go to those countries, and you need to know how to grow it. And that's what I like to think that over the 42 years at Kew, and before that I was in forestry and arboriculture, and that's knowledge that you build up over those years. But you're so right that as gardeners we're very good at sharing.
Yeah.
And that's why we have the best gardens in the world. Because if you invite me over for dinner next weekend, I'm not going to come and bring a bottle of wine. I might do, but I wouldn't insult you with a cheap bottle of wine. But I'll probably bring you a plant. For your garden, and likewise you do the same.
That's a really nice thing, isn't it?
It is.
I think that's very special. And you kind of get it in all walks, get it with trees, you get it on the allotment. People give you food, and
exactly.
You kind of and plants and that kind of the old adage, isn't it? If you want to keep a plant, give it away, then you can go and get it later.
No, that's right. And we learned so much from the storm in 1987. Never have all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
And if you can spread your collections around, that's security. So if we ever do have another storm like that, then since that storm we've distributed trees from our nursery to many other gardens and collections. And we know where they are, and should we ever lose anything here, we can always go. And
that's also, is that genetic as well? You look at DNA sourcing as well. I remember when I worked here, we did in Charlotte's Cottage, we were planting oak trees. They were all DNA genetically sourced from local oak trees. Is that important to you?
It is, and I think that we call that provenance matching, and I think that over the next decade, 2 decades, in order to build up a resilient landscape now, a treescape, which is what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to look at climate, we're going to have to look at pests and diseases, and provenance will play a more important role than it's ever played before.
So it's almost like heritage seeds. You're looking for something that's localised, that will have resilience to that immediate environment, especially as we lose natural sources. Obviously, the deforestation. I mean, it's quite interesting at the moment. We'll talk about different things, but quite a big chunks of the world's forests are on fire at the moment, aren't they?
Right.
Which is quite, that doesn't necessarily get the headlines, does it?
No, and we talk about tropical rainforests disappearing fast, but look at the temperate rainforests. Siberia's on fire, California's on fire, Oregon's on fire, Australia's on fire. What are we losing? We need to be planting more trees correctly. I've been up in the north a bit this year with my family, and I remember going up onto the moors, taking my sisters to show them where the roots were, because they'd moved, and so I was showing them this area, and it was an area of white grass on the edge of moorland, and all you could see were acres and acres and acres of tree shelters. Now someone has hit a lot of targets tree planting. Most of the tree shelters were on upside down, and I didn't see one tree coming out the top of the tree shelters.
Right.
Those trees have been in there for about 5 years.
Okay. So that means that's aftercare.
Maybe wrong choice of trees.
Right.
No weed control, deer management. All these things. So the target needs to be changed from tree planting to tree establishment.
Right. So the numbers that are actually surviving is what we should be looking at.
And if we're saying we're going to plant 1 million trees a year, or establish 1 million trees a year, then we're not planting 1 million. We might have to plant 5 million to meet that target of 1 million 5 years down the line.
Obviously, there's this will there, but is it being done correctly, do you think?
At present, I get very frustrated. A lot of tree failure is aftercare, lack of. And, I always compare trees to people. And we start in we as people, we start in the nursery. We go through kindergarten, nursery, primary school, junior school, secondary school, college, university. Trees are exactly the same.
So those early years are so formative, aren't they?
Critical.
And if you don't get that right, it's funny. I was walking down through Palmer's Green the other day, and there were 7 big oaks. You'd have cried. And I watched them go in last autumn. They've got the kangaroo bags on, I think they call them, and all that. just all gone. And you just think, what? And they're big, heavy standards. They're not cheap.
A lot of money, and you think how long they've been in a nursery, and in 1 year they go. And do you know what? Everyone thinks it can plant a tree. Everyone thinks it can prune. But actually, there's an art and a science to it. And that gets neglected because anyone can pick a spade up, dig a hole and stick a tree in. But actually, if you start to learn the scientific principles behind tree planting, it's easy, but you've got to apply.
You've got to know that. What would you say to them? Would you be your top tips for putting in a tree?
Top tips for putting a tree in. First of all, good nursery stock. So we should be buying UK grown, if possible. UK source, UK grown. The key thing is the planting hole, and we used to call them pits, and we called it a pit because it was deep and it was big and engineered. In actual fact, now all the latest science is wider, shallower, and the most critical part of the operation is planting depth. Most trees are planted too deep. Only an inch, 2 inches too deep will kill a tree, and it's a long, slow death. No organic matter in the planting pit.
You want the roots to penetrate the surrounding soil, then, is what you're saying. Yeah.
That tree should be really healthy and at its most vigorous when you plant it. And if you put it in poor soil, it's got to go and look for water, it's got to go and look for nutrients. And that's when it can do it. If you put a tree in a planting pit, and you remember I said trees are like people, they can be lazy like us. And if I give you a nice steak and chips every night, and you don't have to go and cook it, and you don't have to go to the shop and buy it, you're just going to sit there and take it all in.
A bit like being a spoiled kid in a way, isn't it?
Exactly. And then all of a sudden I cut that off. I say, okay, I'm not going to give you. Where's my steak and chips? By then you've lost your muscle, you've lost your energy. And it's too late to go looking. So it start as you mean to go on, and also by putting compost in planting pits creates a sump and it goes mushy, no fibre there. So I'm an advocate of putting the organic matter on as a mulch at the end, and the tree will take it down as it needs it.
So whack down its taproot, get it strong, then it'll put out its fibre.
Its main thing will be anchor. So I'm anti-staking unless you really have to. It'll then anchor itself. It'll go and look for water, and then it'll go look for nutrients in the order of those three. Yeah. And get it off to a good start, and it'll do all that on its own.
And getting it through that first season, you think for larger trees, if you get it through the first season, that's got more of a chance. Do you think?
Definitely. And talking about climate change or seasonal change, we're planting in autumn now, and people look at your tree's still in full leaf. Surely you wait till spring. Well, the soil's warm. Yeah. It's dry, but we can get water on. The trees, the top will stop growing, but the roots will continue to grow. And they'll grow right through till Christmas now because the soil will be warm enough. So that tree, come spring, when the drought starts, it's part rooted. Yeah. It's on its way.
So it's got a stronger start in the spring. When it starts to photosynthesize, etc. again, it means the roots are down. The roots don't stop. They don't go dormant.
That's right.
Yeah. Talking the technical stuff though, I see terrible pruning wherever I go. Yeah. It's really bad at the moment. I've never known it. I mean, this is in private gardens. Do you still compartmentalize? Do you still use COVID? Or do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I'm not saying I'm the expert on pruning, but I've written 2 pruning books. Yeah. I play around with pruning techniques here. I've got a massive library of trees that I can experiment on. And we do now what we call target pruning. So we're looking at how a branch joins a branch. So we always talk about a branch joining a branch, and the branch that it joins is a parent branch. And that can either be the trunk or a branch or a lateral branch, but branches always have an attachment point. Where they attach, we have the branch bark ridge and a collar. And within that area, it's what we call the reaction zone, and the tree has an ability to compartmentalize, to heal over, create like a compartment that will stop any decay or any organisms.
So it's almost like putting up the drawbridge almost.
It is, yeah. And it's like shutting off and saying, right, nothing can come past here. We call it target pruning because if you look at a branch, you can see concentric circles for the age.
So I would call that the Cambium ridge. It's almost like a lump of bumps, is it?
It is, like a collar. And actually above the branch, on top of the branch, is a ridge of bark. It looks like a Fu Manchu moustache. We call that the branch bark ridge. And it's imperative that you don't break into that ridge or the collar underneath. Right. So you always prune on the away from it. Yeah. And then the tree can heal over. you'll get a round cut, nice donut, and that's in a quick explanation, if you like.
Yeah, so I suppose for the listeners who are a bit unsure, a good example, if you looked at a cherry tree, it always has a really pronounced, where the trunk meets the branch, you'll see that ridging, won't you?
That's right.
That's a good way to identify.
Yeah, that's right. And always prune back to that. Don't be pruning back to a stump. Don't leave a tail or a stump.
You get snags and all
because that will eventually die back. The tree can't compartmentalize behind that, and then that goes into the main branch, into the trunk, and before you know it, you've got decay.
Right.
So prune back to lateral branches, prune back to a parent branch, prune back to the trunk. Don't leave stumps. And then if you do that, you then don't need tree paints. So tree paints are a thing of the past.
Yeah, so you don't, because we used to paint tar on them and all sorts of stuff.
And you're right, Chris, it was all...
So we were sealing in the disease, weren't we? We were sealing it in.
And you're creating a microclimate behind the paint for everything, and hiding a multitude of sins. Let the air get to it. And
because you deal with compaction as one of the things you've pioneered as well, isn't it? When trees, obviously street trees, because roots need oxygen.
They do.
Go about that.
Okay, so you're absolutely right. Tree roots need oxygen just as much as the top. I compare a tree to a wine glass, which you'll be used to, Chris.
Yes, I know.
Okay, so the goblet on top is the crown. Yeah. The stem of the glass is the trunk. And then that flat bit that stops the glass falling over is the root plate. And that's, in perspective and comparison, that's how thick the root plate is. So, for example, here at Kew, there are very few trees, hardly any, with roots deeper than a metre. It's about spread and friction. And the reason for that is because, A, there's no water deeper than that. It goes dry. There's no nutrient, because the nutrient's in the top. And there's no oxygen. So the deeper you go, the more anaerobic the conditions become. And those tree roots need oxygen.
And also, I mean, they also forage, don't they, roots? They will go off and look for nutrient that way as well.
They're searching, and they'll go the easiest route. So if the soil's light and crumbly, they'll get through that really quickly. If it's really compacted, then they'll really struggle.
So if you were at home and you had a tree and you were a bit worried about that, would you just spike round it? Would that be
just spiking it
with a fork, with a garden fork?
Or if you've got the spiker for aerating the lawn, that's good. Yeah. But the other good thing is mulching.
Yeah, I was going to wonder whether mulch.
And I love. They call me Compost Kenneth.
All us organic gardeners love a mulch as well. So,
exactly. And all you got to think about is where trees come from. And, I could say, to you, I said to the students, where do trees come from? So rattle all the nurseries off and go, no. We're not buying one now. Where do they come from in the wild, in nature? They come from woodlands and forests. So people talk about fertilising trees. Well, I've seen trees 500 years old and they've never had a drop of fertiliser in their life, because God doesn't go around spreading fertiliser.
There's no osmocote in a
They are cannibals.
Yeah.
They eat themselves and they eat other trees.
So the cycle of life.
It is. Yeah. And the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. And so, when they drop their leaves in a woodland, the worms, the mycorrhizal fungi break that down, the tree takes it down. They drop a branch, that breaks down, it rots with the mycorrhizal fungi. Nothing wasted. It's all eaten. And so what we're doing here at Kew, and again, another area that we pioneered with decompaction, was mulching. And basically, you could just, we blow leaves under canopies now rather than raking them. So I don't rake any leaves here at Kew.
Yeah.
We let the worms and the badgers do all that. And then, rather than just leaving branches everywhere, so it would look really bad. And as gardeners, we like...
There has to be some aesthetics to it.
Yeah, exactly. So we bring all the wood in here, we shred it, we chip it, we mix it, we compost it, and then we bring it back out and we put it around the base of trees. And basically, we're mimicking a woodland. Ecological matching again. Psychologically, the trees are thinking, I'm in a wood.
Yeah,
and that's what we're doing. And there's no fertiliser, it's just pure organic matter.
Right. Well, there's tons of info in there. I'm going to wrap up just a little bit with a few personal things. Two things. Favourite tree, if that's possible, because it's a hard question. But also, where do you like visiting the most? Where, all these travels, is there a spot that you really love?
Okay, favourite tree varies. But probably one of my favourite trees is tulip tree.
Really?
So you got that beautiful leaf, the flower, and then that autumn colour. And then the bark, silver bark, fissured. It's just a magnificent tree, and I call that a hard-working tree. So, if you've got to justify having a tree in your garden, you've got spring, you got summer interest, you've got autumn interest.
All those characteristics,
all those,
yeah.
the shade it provides.
Yeah.
So I like hard-working trees, tulip trees. And there's only 2 species. The North American one's a good one, and I love the North American one, but the Chinese one's more elegant. But I wouldn't be bothered.
Either or,
yeah.
And what about place?
West Coast, North America.
Right, just for the sheer size of the tree, the sequoias,
It's just mind-blowing and humbling, and walking through these forests, looking at these named trees, so the biggest Douglas fir in the world, and I don't want to leave.
No, it's overpowering almost,
Absolutely.
Isn't it? As the expression goes, it's like going back through time to the beginning when vegetation united and the trees were kings.
What a saying! I'm impressed, Chris.
That is the heart of darkness, isn't it? That is, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll finish off with just like, you've got many an accolade, a deserved accolade, haven't you? But recently you got the big one, didn't you? You got the MBE. That must have been a big day for you and Mrs. K and the kids.
And
was
the kids,
that, was that a good day? Describe that day for us.
Well, actually, it was a good year, Chris, because I got the VMH and the RHS in the spring, and then in the Queen's Honours New Year's Honours list, I got the MBE. And you know what? You never expect it. So when you get that letter, it's quite an emotional thing, and you just think, well, that's the one you want to tell your mum about, And we had a day at Buckingham Palace again just before lockdown.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing thing, and you know that everything that you do is noted and worthwhile.
Recognition.
I
can see in your eyes how much it means to you. Actually,
I'm really shedding a tear.
Big day for you, mate. Well, I'll tell you what, son, it's an absolute pleasure. I can speak to you all week, mate. No problem. I hope the people who listen to the Garden Organic podcast will get a lot from that conversation. I really thank you very much, mate. Mr. Tree, definitely Mr. Tree. You'll always be that to me, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
If you loved that interview and want to hear more from Tony, then listen to the unpruned version of the podcast, which will appear shortly. He goes into great detail about native trees, their strengths and uses, and discusses the terrible pests and diseases that trees are faced with now. You need to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Just press the subscribe button now on your phone, laptop, or wherever you're listening to us, and then you'll catch every one of our podcasts. Okay, so now it's time to open our monthly post bag. Chris and I are joined by our friends at Garden Organic, Hannah and Anton. Hi, both of you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hannah, what have you got in this month's post bag?
Oh, we've got quite a nice mixed selection of questions today. So we're starting off with a composting one. So we've been asked, someone has been clearing their brassica bed and they're not sure if they can put the yellow diseased looking leaves on the compost heap. Anton, is this something you can help with?
Yeah, this is a great big can of worms, really. I would say sort of yellow plants which are just dying off naturally, no problem with putting those in your compost heap. They're just going to break down. In terms of plant diseases, that really does start to become more complicated because things need plant material to survive on, and once that material is broken down in the compost heap, then they are unlikely to survive. But some diseases will survive the composting process because your compost bin at home really doesn't get that hot. So it's not really a simple answer for everything. And I think really if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not really that sure, then it probably is better to put it in your council waste bin where it'll be composted at a really high temperature and it really will kill off those diseases. But to go back to the brassica leaves, brassicas with a few black spots on will be fine to put in your compost. Those leaves will break down and they won't survive till next year.
Anton, is there a difference between plant diseases which are soil-borne and those which are actually on the leaf?
Yes, that's probably our main distinction we should be making. There are some plant diseases which can survive in the soil even though there isn't plant growing there, and they form sort of resting spores, and these are the most pernicious of diseases. So a few examples like clubroot of brassicas, that will kick around in the soil for about 20 years or so. It also needs quite high temperatures to break it down, so it will definitely survive in your compost. So yeah, soil-borne diseases, anything that's got a soil-borne disease, definitely be sending it off to your council where it'll be composted at high temperatures. You don't want to be putting it in your domestic compost bin.
I guess one of the problems for any of us is to being able to identify these diseases, and that's just a matter really of looking online and trying to match what you're looking at with a picture that's online. Would you agree?
I'd agree with that. I mean, there are some obvious ones. Club root is really pretty easy to identify. You get a plant which has got big swelling that looks like a ginger root on it. But other things, I mean, even we sometimes struggle to know exactly what the problem is. You know, sometimes a nutrient deficiency can look quite similar to a disease, and without sort of looking really closely, you might struggle to know what the problem is.
Okay, well, let's see if we can help the listener by playing perhaps a quick fire round of what is and what isn't good to go on the compost heap. So let's think of some perhaps more obvious ones. Let's start off with potato blight.
So potato blight is one of those diseases that most of the time it won't survive in the soil. If you've got blighted leaves, you can safely put those in your compost heap. The leaves will break down and the disease will die off. If you've got blighted tubers, the disease can survive in the tuber and that might grow into an infected plant inside your compost bin, which will infect things next year. So sort of bigger structures are more likely to survive.
Okay, so best to send them to the green waste. Let's move to tomato blight.
Again, tomato blight is pretty similar. It's actually the same disease as potato blight. It needs living material to survive, so it won't survive in your compost bin. Sometimes people are worried about putting the seeds in there. Actually, the disease isn't transmitted on the seeds. The only danger is that it might grow into tomato plants inside your bin, which then become infected from somewhere else. So you just need to keep an eye on them.
Okay, that's helpful. Courgettes. Now, mine, like a lot of people's, got powdery mildew by the end of the growing season.
Yeah, I think most people see powdery mildew on their courgettes at the end of the growing season. That's pretty unlikely to survive in the compost bin.
Okay, but it's fine to put them on the compost heap. And I guess the big tip as well also is to chop it up finely because it'll break down more quickly.
Yes, the less likely there are sort of surviving bits of plant material in, the less likely there are to be sort of disease surviving in the compost.
And finally, I think if there's anything that you are not sure about, and Anton has been quite honest, it is a bit of a minefield, don't risk it. Don't put it on your home compost heap. Send it off to the Green Waste Recycling Centre. Sorry, that's not easy to say, where they will be able to deal with it at much higher temperatures. Hannah, do you think that helps with the query?
Yep, that's really useful. Thank you. So the next question is quite relevant at the moment as I hear the rain pouring on the window. So someone's written in and said their soil is very heavy and waterlogged. What would we suggest they can do about it? Chris, is this something you can help with?
Well, it sounds like a heavy clay soil, which contains a lot of iron molecules which tend to adhere. So when it's really wet, it all sticks together. In fact, it sticks together so much you can almost make a cricket ball out of it if you bind it together. Of course, the other problem as well is if it dries, it becomes like concrete. The long-term solution is obviously to have that compost bin working and making sure you're getting plenty of organic matter onto it, and gradually that'll break the clay down, let the air in, let the plant roots go in, get the air and the water moving through it. You might also have a pan. What that is where the clay forms like a solid layer a little bit under the soil surface in the subsoil. So dig down and make sure you break that up. Ultimately, your long-term goal, get the composting going, get lots of organic matter on it and turn it into a plant-friendly area. There are other things as well you can do. Our famous grain manures. We love to talk about our green manures because they're so useful. Put those in as well. The roots will get in through to the clay, let the soil through, let the air through, break down those clay molecules and break up the soil and make sure you can grow stuff in it. Traditionally, I suppose, we would have also dug it over in the autumn. I would have gone in with a mattock, maybe chunked it over and left the frost to it, let the frost get on it to break it up. But nowadays, that's probably, and certainly in the south of England, that's not such a good idea because we just don't get those kind of winters. Maybe the further north you go, that's still an idea. If you've just moved into a place and you're looking out the window and you think, I really want to do a garden and it's all stodgy and clay and puddled and looks terrible, there are some emergency measures you can take. I would normally go and put in what I call a soak away. You tend to find on new properties, you might even have clinker and old bricks in the soil anyway. But dig a big 1 square metre hole right in the lowest point of the garden and then just fill that with clinker, with brick and anything like that. And that means the water will gravitate towards that lowest point of the garden and soak away. Another thing you can do, which is really important, is actually put some grit slits in down about 1/2 metre and backfill them with gravel, horticultural gravel, and that will, again, aid drainage. So there is some emergency measures you can do.
Chris, I'm really glad you mentioned green manures because we've mentioned them previously, but in case you don't know what they are, these are plants which actually help your soil, either by releasing nutrients or by changing the structure of the soil. And so in this instance, I would say field beans are very good, or alfalfa, which has a long taproot which will break up the soil and as it grows.
Perfect, yep.
That's really useful, thank you. So our last question is quite an interesting one, and this has been sent in by a Garden Organic member. So this member has 2 orange trees planted 35 years ago by one of their sons from Pips. They transported them to the Scottish Highlands in a removal van. They've never fruited, but they're much loved and valued. Recently, they noticed some leaf damage that they're very concerned about. So the members sent in a photo which shows large portions of leaves missing and stripped, and curled up leaves with lots of sticky silk webbing. Anton, can you help with this one?
Yeah, this is almost certainly the work of the Tortrix moth. It actually looks really terrible, but it's reasonably easy to deal with. It rarely kills the plant, and it is also very common in citrus trees, especially when you bring them into a sheltered space over the winter. The moth finds a nice place to reside over there. So the adult moth's quite pretty, really. It's a sort of light brown colour with these sort of wavy dark brown stripes on it, and then the caterpillars are light green. And best place to find them is in the rolled up pieces in the leaves, where they sort of form a silky webbing there. And really the easiest thing to do is just keep an eye out for them and removing them and crushing the leaves where the rolled up parts are. You just need to keep an eye on it. There aren't really any sprays which are going to be more effective than just removing them. If you do that, you will be able to keep on top of them. I would say it's more of a nuisance than something that's going to kill your plant. I certainly remember seeing plants in our glass houses at Garden Organic quite decimated by them, but they came back pretty readily once we'd removed the pest.
I love the triumph of optimism of growing oranges in the Highlands.
I was just thinking it's like it's the plant equivalent of 2 cockneys in Inverness, isn't it? You know, you don't find many there, do you?
Well, that's really useful. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you again next month.
Cheers. Have a good day.
Bye.
Well, we've come to the end of this month's podcast. Thank you for listening. Next month, I get to meet Don Murray. You may know his work at the Newt, the spectacular new organic garden in Somerset. Don also worked at the Eden Project and Mount Stewart Gardens in Scotland, and he's just recently been appointed Director of Organic Horticulture here at Garden Organic. I can't wait to get chatting with him. Until then, take care, keep in good spirits, and enjoy whatever organic growing challenges November brings. Our thanks to Kevin MacLeod for providing the music.